So in this topic, I want to have a look at how we define the governance structure of your architectural practice. And by governance structure, it's more around how do the bits and pieces of my practice fit together, organizational roles, and how they interact with some of the other disciplines across the enterprise. All right, so let's start by looking at a model that I drew for you in topic 3 when we were looking at governance. It really consisted of sort of 3 layers. Up at the top here was what we referred to as a strategic layer, and I might have referred to it as a strategic model, if I did refer to it as a strategic model. All right, we then have the architecture model, which sits here, and we then have the solution model, which sits here. So those are really the 3 areas or broader models that I'm trying to elaborate on as I work through my architectural discipline. And if you recall, we spoke about a downward focused governance looking at impact, and then an upward focused one looking at reviews. Now, in line with that, your architectural practice can actually engage with these areas in different manners. So what we have, or different styles, let's refer to it, okay. TOGAF refers to it as classes of engagement. So what you do is you have an identification of change, which occurs here. That's really where you're engaging with the strategic level of your organization, and you're trying to help them identify where does change need to occur. So you can expect that class of engagement to sit up at this level here with a dotted line into the architectural model. Right. So that's one class of engagement. The other class of engagement is what we refer to as the definition of change. Now this is really where we've identified what needs to change. Well, now how do we define it? What does it look like? And that's really where a lot of the architecture discipline now takes place. So this is the solid line where all of the work takes place, but obviously with a dotted line coming in from the strategic model. And that's to do with the definition of change. So we've got identify it, where do we need to change, what needs to change, and then we've got defining it. In other words, what do the building blocks look like, how they're all strung together. That's the architectural space. And then finally, you have what's referred to as the implementation of change. Now remember, when we spoke about implementation of change, we referred to that as the realization iteration. Now the architecture discipline isn't responsible for actually delivering the outcomes of that change. It's actually responsible for the governing of it. So this is really where the architecture discipline with the models here, right, is governing the change that's occurring at that level. So in other words, as the teams are delivering, they're on the shop floor, our car analogy, they're in the factory floor, they're assembling it. Within the implementation of change, the architects are walking around, so to speak, with their clipboards, checking that everything's going according to plan. And those really define the 3 classes of engagement. In other words, how the architectural practice will engage with business at these 3 levels. So have a closer look at the image on your screen, which is part of the TOGAF framework, just giving you a little more detail around these classes of engagement as you engage with the business. Now the challenge when building a governance structure is really getting a view of how your architectural organization interacts with the other disciplines across the business. That, surprisingly enough, is one of the keys to success. You can spend a lot of time focusing internally on your processes, but let's take a closer look at the other disciplines and how the enterprise architecture discipline can engage with them across the strategic architecture and solutions models. So what you have here are some of the other disciplines you'd expect to find across an enterprise. So there's the business planning discipline, strategic planning, enterprise architecture, business operations, this is the running of the business, by the way, portfolio and project management, change management, solution architecture, and solution development. Now it's important to remember that while you're building an architectural practice, which is sitting here in the middle, in nature of fact, don't focus too much internally on all your processes, tools, and techniques, because really architecture tends to fail or come unstuck when you're actually interacting with a number of the other disciplines. So really you've got to consider all of these little touch points that sit around it. So let's take a look at how some of the engagement models would apply. So if, for example, I was dealing with the identification of change, which would sit up at the strategic model space, that's really where enterprise architecture is supporting this particular circle here. Okay. And that's where I'm interacting up at the EA as a strategic enabler space. In other words, the market model right up at the top of my mandate curve would tend to occur within that area. If I'm now looking at it as an architecture and I'm engaging with business to define the change, in other words, the definition of change, I'm looking more down at the architectural model space. Well, then I'm sitting within this space here. And that's really where things like capability-based planning and those sort of techniques would also come into play, sort of sitting and interacting with that space. Now, also within this environment, and one piece that is often forgotten, is interacting with the change management team. So you can extend this loop here, and you're defining the change, right? So remember, as we're defining the change of an organization, and we're dealing with the strategic layer and the architectural layer, we're interacting with the business planning, the enterprise architecture, and the change management teams. Because now we've already got the strategic plans, we're now beginning to define that change more effectively. We need to see how the impact of that change on the organization. And then finally, you have the implementation of the change. And that's really where the architecture discipline helps with the implementation of that change across the operations of business, the rollout of those changes across program and project management, the delivery of those changes into the solution development space, and the architecture of the solutions that would need to be rolled out into the solutions development space. So bearing in mind there is a difference between enterprise architecture and solution architecture, whereas enterprise looking as a strategic level across the whole enterprise and looking at a lot of financial factors and how we build cohesion across the organization. The solution architecture is very focused on specific solution domains and how to drive those out through the project landscape. So in actual fact, I'm missing a line here, which is quite a strong connection that would sit between solution architecture and program and portfolio management. So really that's the three areas of engagement, all right, as I'm interacting with the various disciplines across the organization. And it's, just to reiterate the point once again, you must understand your relationships and, with each of those disciplines and how you engage with them and how you interact with them. And that provides a broader set of value to the organization than just enterprise architecture. So just closing off the governance topic, the governance structure topic. If you recall, we had the ADM, and within the ADM, we had spun off, this is a very rough ADM, we had spun off a smaller ADM at this level here. So here we're going to have a spin off of the wheel here. Sitting within here, there's the business architecture piece, there's the information systems architecture piece, and there's the technology architecture piece. Now, what you do at this stage is you look at pieces of business architecture. So what you've got to do is look at the processes of how I conduct my architectural practice. In other words, how do I do monitoring? How do I do governance? How do I do change management? So these are the types of processes that you're actually going to look at, which you'll get from your business architecture of the architecture practice. Then what you have to do is you have to look at the content that those processes deal with. All right? And that content could be requirements, it could be artifacts, deliverables, documents, those things, and it's going to be working on that content. And that's coming from your information systems architecture. And all of that gets stored in a repository that we introduced in Module 1 in a structured fashion using your meta model and those types of pieces. Right? And the repository is really a technology architecture. And all of this would be governed by some or other rules and process flow that we're dealing with. Right? So that's really a conclusion around how you would use the ADM and bits of the ADM to complete the domains of your actual architectural practice.